Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start right on time and end right on time, out of respect for everybody's time, so we're still eating lunch. So this is a very informal group. I want to thank everybody for coming, and if it's okay, before you take a mouthful of food, we'll just go around the podium real quick and introduce yourself. I would appreciate that. Mike, would you start?
Mike Redlinger, Assistant Administrator.
Jim Gilmore, City Fargo staff.
Travis Cook with U.S. Bank.
Linda Boyd with the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony, former city commissioner and former school board member.
John Strand, City Commission.
Dave Pepcorn, Fargo City Commission.
Brad Wimmer of Wimmer's Diamonds and former commissioner and DCP board. Travis.
Charlie Johnson, Fargo-Moorhead and West Fargo Convention and Visitors Bureau.
David Supas, Fargo Dome.
Rob Soblik, Fargo Dome, City of Fargo. Kent Costin, City of Fargo Finance Director.
So and I apologize, John and I are the co-chairs, and the other thing I wanted to say is, so with our commission meetings, anybody can put something on the agenda, so I want to make sure that you are all, you know that you're able to do that, and so Mike, maybe you can be in charge of that as far as if somebody wants to have a specific topic, please contact Mike, and if you don't mind giving us your email address, so down the road, if you ever have an issue that you want to make sure we address, please contact him, and then we'll put it on the agenda, if that makes sense to everybody. Would you give that to us real quick, Mike?
Yep, absolutely. Feel free to email anytime, mredlinger@fargond.gov.
Okay, and then since we're the co-chairs and I'm hogging the mic so far,
Go right ahead.
I just want to say this is a little bit of an overwhelming thing for me, because the opportunity that we have now, the city, because of the flood protection and the diversion, but also the new city hall, there's so much land here that now is under the city's control at this time. We will be setting the tone for generations, and so this is an opportunity. So I thank you all for participating. But I'm just telling you, that's what I feel. That I feel it's a little bit overwhelming. That it's we will be setting the tone, and so I hope you're all looking forward to it. Because to me, as a lot of you already know, there's a little bit of drudgery and not so much fun stuff going on sometimes. This is the fun part. So I hope you all agree with that. All right. I'm sorry, John. No, you go. I'm sorry.
No, I just challenge us all, and welcome to the table. This project, if we get to that point, will be nothing more than a reflection of what we're able to put together creatively. And in that light, one of my best definitions of creativity is working with what ingredients you have and see what you can mix it into and turn it into. So if we can maybe not have too rigid or preconceived notions, come in with an open mind, think out of the box, listen to our constituents, listen to the engaged participants, the partners who would be involved, and we might be surprised at some of the needs they have or wants they have or ideas they share with us to turn this into a more viable project going forward. And all of our best skill sets will come to play into this, not just in the public sector, but especially in the private sector.
And so, Mike, if you don't mind getting us started as far as the different discussion points and things like that.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. And on behalf of the staff, we thank you for your time as well to assist with this committee. We think this is a real important one, and your voices are important as we have this community conversation about what it is we desire to see, not only for the Civic Center in downtown, but the greater community of Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area. What we have prepared at the staff level for your review and for your addition, deletion, is a listing of Performing Arts Task Force topics by month. As we were talking to Dave, we thought that it was logical that we could have an organizing meeting today and then talk about meeting frequency, talk about our goals and objectives, and trying to wrap up the work of this task force, if folks are agreeable with that, by January, perhaps February in 19. What you have in front of you is just a list of suggested topics. Again, we've talked about this with Dave and some of you as well, just to kind of start framing up some of the discussion points with the greater community about what it might take from a capital investment standpoint to build a new facility, confirming that facility's location, talking about the types of users, then also learning some of the best practices from internally within the city, like Fargo Dome and other operations that we have, as well as the Civic Center as it exists today, to determine how we would operate a new facility and what a governance and operating structure might look like long term. So these are just suggestions for topics. Again, we're completely open to changing this up. and making sure that we add topics that are of interest to the task force. This, as Dave said, it's a task force really for the community, and you folks as ambassadors for the community will really drive the agenda and own the agenda. So this is just a start, and we're open for any feedback you have.
So let's open it up. Does anybody in the audience, if you wish to have comments, we'd love to have you come up to the podium. Other than that, does anybody have any opening comments they'd like to make?
I had to turn it on, okay. I think this is great. Thanks for inviting us all to be here. I'm happy we're moving forward with at least an attempt to get this done. I'm curious, I just glanced at this. Are we talking about, at some point during this discussion, trying to come up with some better drawings, hire an architect, or do you see that coming farther down after the January report?
I think that's actually, Mike, you go ahead.
I think, Charlie, you're asking a question that's right in line with what we're thinking. The HVS report was already 3 years old. That was commissioned back in the late fall of 14, early 15. And I think the question is, what other technical services would the committee desire to bring on board? Would we like to revisit with HVS some of the study recommendations? You know, a lot has changed. HVS talked pretty extensively about Centennial Hall. Well, that has since been demolished and is removed. Sanctuary Event Center, brand new facility that now has come online, is also hosting events. So the landscape has changed somewhat, in addition to the new City Hall and other things downtown. So I think that is a question, and that would be a question of this group. Do we desire to revisit either this study or bring in some other resources to start thinking about your program and your users and what it is you want to do with this facility?
And if we decided we wanted to pursue some architectural renderings / concept drawings, is there funding for that?
I think that would be part of the responsibility of the city, I believe, and so I believe we would get some. And I'm guessing it wouldn't be quite as expensive as it was originally, just because we wouldn't be starting from scratch. So I guess that's a good question.
I mean, yeah, ultimately, we need to determine what the cost factor, what we want to build and what the cost factor is.
And that's why, what John talked about, not having any preconceived notions, I think that's important, because it might be that it isn't just a standalone, or it might, you know what I mean? There's lots of potential things that I hope we look at, and so that's part of I don't know if that makes sense to you, Charlie, but I think that's part. Go ahead, Jim.
I just wanted, and maybe this is something that Charlie could provide us. You talk about the program. Is there a demand for meeting space that should be incorporated into this that was not included in that first program?
Yes.
Given, but especially we're getting another hotel downtown. There's certainly potential for even more, and so I'd like your thoughts on that. I don't know where the convention center idea is, but just what type of meeting space do you think is needed for us to look at in this type of facility?
Well, this wouldn't replace my desire for, significant convention center style space. But I do think if it's constructed properly with a little bit of meeting space in it to go with what I assume will be a lovely auditorium that will seat, between 2,000 and 2,500, and the fact that it would be skywalked to both hotels in town, the new one and the Radisson, I think would give it potential for holding meetings of, of various sizes, several hundred people certainly, who wanted to be downtown. I don't think there's any way this would develop into a facility where you could have exhibit space of any significance, but, I think if it had, Linda, I don't know, if practice rooms, rehearsal rooms can double as breakout meeting space, depends on how big they are, if they could be flat floored and open them up, then you might get a couple of different uses out of that space. That's what I would like to see anyway, because I think if you build this, I think people will we have demand for meetings downtown, from groups that don't need that exhibit space. So we would put some meetings in it for sure. We would help fill it up, but that wouldn't preclude the need for larger meeting space for larger groups, and especially things that have to have exhibit space. I mean, I don't see meetings as the primary use for this building, don't get me wrong, but I think it could double in some instances for certain groups.
We were talking earlier today about the multi-use of the facility too, like even the whole thing of restrooms, or do you have even small businesses on the exterior that or the potential things. We have to look at all these things, I think, that what can we do? And also the plaza now that's developing between the city hall and the library and all that, but also what's coming now with Block 9, there's going to be a public space there. How will we combine efforts with that? So it's going to be a complicated, but a fun challenge.
I just want to thank you for including me on this group, and I feel like I represent not just the symphony, but the performing arts segment of the arts community. And I think the thing I see identifying potential users is kind of down a ways. I wonder if that might not need to be flipped, because as we start talking about whether it's funding or design or usage or multi-purpose or whatever, I think we have to keep in mind the distinctive needs of a facility like this if we're talking about a proper performing arts facility. And I think certainly the sentiment has been throughout the community, man, it's time, because we have top-notch performing arts organizations without a proper facility. You know, we've got great football facilities, we've got a beautiful baseball park, we have meeting spaces all over town. We have a lot of things that are absolutely designed for their use. The YMCAs, I mean, the full gamut. But the big black hole is there really is not, and that includes NDSU Performing Arts Center, which was designed as a multi-purpose space, which means it's not ideal for our purpose. So I think we can't lose sight that at its core, it really has to be properly designed for its primary purpose.
Can I just add a couple things? So I just was at the groundbreaking yesterday, or the ribbon cutting for the FM Community Theater. They have a small new, right on Broadway, 6 Broadway, a little theater. And so there's, and what I see us as being is the city is going to be the conduit, but this is going to be a collaboration of a whole lot of different things. And so that's why I hope we're not in a rush, and I hope we make sure that we have everybody have their input and to try to make the best of it, because I think this is a unique opportunity. And like you said, we want to, if we all combine our efforts, the facility can be fantastic and will benefit lots of different groups. But the 2,500 seat is that's the number that Rob is looking for. That's for the touring, the large Broadway shows. That's because my vision is, why don't we have Hamilton coming to Fargo instead of just Minneapolis? And it would be sold out. That's the kind of stuff that I'm excited about. All right.
It's doing 10 nights in Omaha.
Yeah. So those.
Amazing.
Anybody else have any comments? To me, this is an opportunity. Go ahead, Brett.
Just a quick comment. You know, I appreciate, kind of pushing us forward a little bit. Again, not rushing, but I'm hoping the group is sort of in the mood that we're going to do this and sort of stay positive with it. I think the key is going to be those naming rights and the major donors. I think will be an absolute key to this process. If they aren't out there, I'm not sure we can get it built. But I think and I believe truly they are out there. And I think they're just looking, Linda, for something like this. They've got enough of their names on, like you say, every football field in town. And I think they're looking for something unique and different. And I think this will fit the bill. Not yet. There is a Wimmer pickleball court.
Okay.
So
You got a little left over.
I think that we have a unique opportunity. I mean, the last time this was challenged was back in the Charlie Bailey days, maybe 25 years ago, and they didn't get it done. Had they gotten it done at that time, we would be looking at over the river at a beautiful facility. It's not there, so I think the opportunity is there now, and if we don't have it, I think you're going to look in another 25 years.
And I do think one of the advantages, we have the Fargo Dome as kind of our role model. And with the management of the Fargo Dome, and our goal to be that it either breaks even or makes money, I think that a lot of donors are looking for that they want to have a sustainable budget and things like that to support, instead of having something that they're going to have to keep coming back to ask for more things. And then one of the things, Linda, I'm glad you're here. The other thing is, I think there's large arts donors nationwide that we can write things possibly down the road. That might be something, and that's maybe way down the road, but there's large arts supporters nationwide that would, if we show that this is going to be viable, might be willing to participate. So that excites me.
Just 2 other comments. I think if we all, and I think you know, my ideal facility, you know, yeah, everybody's got a picture of what this facility looks like. And I think if we get too selfish, each and every one of us, the participants, I don't think it'll happen. I think if we can get 80 to 95% of what we think this facility will be, I think it can happen. So I think anybody's preconceived notion, and that's why, John, yes, let's be open and let's look at it. But we aren't going to get 100%. We're just too individualistic. We're all looking at different things. And but I think if we can compromise a bit, I think we can get this done.
One of the questions that, going off of what Linda said, as far as the Performing Arts Center, that has me curious is, from somebody perhaps who isn't in tune to the performing arts side, I'm kind of interested in a broad sense of who would the potential tenants be. I mean, obviously the FM Orchestra would be one of them, but I'm kind of a list. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but kind of a list of who are we thinking of, is to go off what John said, is to start separating out the ingredients of who would be involved in this here, because right now I simply don't know who the tenants could possibly be.
Yeah, that's been kind of listed and studied a few times, but I think clearly you'd see a very robust calendar. The Fargo-Moorhead Symphony is a full season. Fargo-Moorhead Opera, River Performing Dance Company. The 3 colleges, the high schools have all expressed an interest in having like a major event there. They all have their own facilities, but you know, Concordia College, perhaps the Christmas thing, they would want to move that around a bit. It would certainly open up a lot of opportunities for the local groups we have in town. There's 3 or 4 choral groups. And so some of the facilities that we've mentioned, Fargo Theater, Sanctuary, it's either the space, the staging, the seating is really not ideal. We're all trying to, you know, play golf on a parking lot kind of thing. And then you get beyond that, the touring companies you're talking about, the kinds of things that are at the Fargo Dome that you kind of cordon off and trying to create a performing arts center out of a dome. That might be one potential tenant. They may decide to stay where they are. They may want the kind of theater that they're used to performing in around the country. And I'm sure Jade would fill it up as much as we'd let him with any other available dates. So I think the full, robust evening calendar would be the least of our worries. And then daytime, of course, that opens up for all sorts of meeting space. You know, there's rehearsals and things tend to happen in the evening. So I think scheduling it would have a lot of opportunity for multi-use. And then special events, my goodness, you build anything, people want to have a wedding reception in it, so.
And I think we look at, Charlie mentioned Omaha. I think we look at 2-3 venues within 1,000 miles, and we visit them, or somebody visits them, tours them, and finds out what their programming is, and I think this list will be right there for you, David, honestly. You know, Omaha might be a good example. Maybe that's the best, maybe it's not. I don't know, Sioux Falls.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the demographics of who we're kind of moving this around.
And I think also the architect or whoever we hire, or the consultant/architect, will interview enough people and enough other venues to find out who that tenant is.
When I looked at Omaha, they actually have 2 performers. So I conveniently, for my purposes, combined the calendars.
Yeah.
And that was 2 or 3 months, beginning of summer. And I saw that between the 2 of them, they had like already booked for this season, which starts now, they had over 100 nights booked, and there was still stuff to come. So, you know, it seems reasonable to me that once this is up and running, it won't happen the first year, you know, but once it's up and running, I think we could target some idea like that. I would hope between all of the local and the touring things, whether they be Broadway shows or concerts that Jade or anybody else would bring in.
And as we're talking about that, and, you know, the users are going to be primarily local. And it means we have to be able to, as organizations, afford to use the space. And as we're talking about what kind of resources is it going to take to not only, you well know, build it, but staff it and repair it and, you know, have that operating revenue. Keep in mind that we're talking about the same donors that we rely on every year. We don't have public money. We have a little bit of public money, excuse me. But we rely on donors for our operations. So this facility can't be kind of a black hole that kind of wipes out the rental organizations that we're depending on to use it. So it's going to be a complex, very interlocking discussion, but those things are all kind of related.
Has to be affordable for local.
I think, Charlie, you're talking about the other venues. I think it would be a good thing for us to look at, we were at Sioux Falls, we visited that, and Winnipeg, just to see what are the things that go on in their venues that are similar to what we're looking at, just to see what their schedule looks like. And like you said, Omaha as well. So with some of the people that haven't spoken yet, I don't want to call on you by name, but I'd love to have you, if you have anything you want to share with us, I'd appreciate it. How about Ken?
Well, I mean, I just think from a financial perspective, working in this environment at Fargo for all these years, I mean, we've really been proactive in moving the ball along in a lot of venues and a lot of different projects, and I just see this one matching up pretty nicely as well. Continue to add quality of life and amenities that want to bring people here and make them want to stay here and relocate here when they're making those tough decisions. If you're wanting to move a family or moving a career or whatever, those intangibles do make a difference.
So as far as we kind of have in front of us kind of the upcoming schedule, are there any specific, does the order look okay, or are there things you think we should change right away as far as for our next meeting, let's say? Does anybody have any suggestions or changes?
I have a question, just to put in our thinking caps. In my mind, there are different issues, whether we have or go the path of a performing arts center, and then where is it? I'm not so sure in my head that it's all one decision or one discussion. You know, one option, some say, is the Civic Center demolishing or build new or renovating, and another might be we might be surprised what people might come up with as far as a sense of what the Civic could conceivably maybe be used for. And if we're going to be building new, maybe build on an entirely new site entirely. But so I hope we I don't know how we separate those two. I don't want to see them so intertwined that they're connected so integrally that it forces us to stay on just that path. If there are other options to be open to, I'd sure hope we can explore them all.
And just to that, and Travis, correct me, and Linda was on a few of the meetings, and we've sort of dissected 3 or 4 locations. And in our mind, this came down to the best of the locations. But having said that, I'm not sure we shouldn't do a search. And I think in our minds, the search has been done. But, John, if we need to do that, but I would say that's in a 30-day or a 45-day window that we finalize that. This site has so many advantages. At least that's what our mini committee, which had no jurisdiction, no nothing, no. Some of you were at some of the meetings, some weren't. So it really has no overseer to it. We just met and tried to move this along. But this by far was, I think you would agree, the best site. But we reviewed several. And, you know, the Mid-America site was certainly one. And then we didn't view too many because we came from the Downtown Community Partnership Organization, so we didn't view too many outside of the downtown area. We thought this needed to be downtown.
A question I have too, maybe Linda can answer this, but just so I throw this up front. I've had experience in the past, years and years ago, where I became aware while I was in college of organizations that just didn't have a place to put a desk or a file cabinet or a telephone or meet. And back then at NDSU, we arranged so that organizations had a home, and it just filled the space. One of the thoughts I have in my mind is, yes, we have a concept of a performing arts center that will be a hub for events, but I'd like to throw the concept out there that it might conceivably also be a home for the organizations that might create a synergy and a level of energy and connectedness that might not otherwise exist, because they're all over the place. The symphony and the performing art, or the arts partnership and Opera and all this whole list, they're scattered. So just a thought to put in our thinking caps of, is there a potential viability to, in this bigger picture, including spaces for them so that there's traffic all the time with them and they're always interacting with each other? Just an idea.
Well, since you mentioned me by name, I'll answer. The arts community is pretty tight, and a great deal of the credit of that goes to the Arts Partnership, but we collaborate all the time. I would say office space is not the highest, best purpose of what anyone's looking for. We all have our offices. We're fine. We deal with each other electronically daily. I think, and if we are all trying to share brand-new physical space, I think we've all found our own economy office spaces that we're happy with. So I would say that let's not let that drive anything, because that will, I'm afraid, get us off into secondary space planning that really is not a need. No one is crying out for shared office space.
It's just an idea.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as our time is going to be precious, and I feel like part of my purpose is to help keep our eye on the prize of the highest, best usage of whatever the space is going to be. Understanding that the key of that is going to be knowing the needs of the real variety of users. I'm not saying let's call it Symphony Hall at all, because we have to make it flexible enough to have the greatest usage, but yet well-designed enough so that it really serves its proper purpose. So I'm this person for once.
When it comes to locations, you know, Rob and Dave and I here, we've looked at a lot of locations for convention space, but we've also talked about the performing arts angle a little bit. I think I'm much more liberal in where I think a convention space can go than I am a performing arts center, in my own mind. Again, this is strictly my opinion, but I think a performing arts center of the sort we're discussing would be a jewel to have downtown, and it would be active a lot of nights a year, either with traveling or local things going on, be in the heart of downtown, on that plaza, close to the new Block 9 plaza. I think it's the perfect place for it. I don't want that to sound like I'm closed-minded about it. I'm just giving you what I've thought about it. Because we've thought about both facilities. Both of us have quite a bit, right, Rob? And we've done studies about locations for convention centers, and there's a lot of pressure from some groups to put both downtown. I'm not of that mind personally, but I do feel quite strongly that the Performing Arts Center of the two is a much better fit for downtown because of the traffic it brings. Just what those people are looking for, you know, which is probably a lot of entertainment and, you know, food and drink before and after the performances. So I think downtown will be a wonderful spot for it. That's my 2 cents worth.
Jim?
You know, if this is the site, the other thing to think about is, you know, what's the best use of these adjacent sites? I mean, we have a police station that's going to be vacated next year, a health department building that has the police. And so, you know, if this is a site, what is the best future land uses to complement a center here? Or if it's somewhere else, it's the same thing. It's, you know, not just looked at the center, but what's around it and what kind of development might it spur, you know, given different locations.
But it's also the Mid-America Steel site, and then actually the site that's just on the other end of this other corner of this very block. So, and then the other thing is, I think we've always just, our vision is that it's just this building. Well, what if it's a mixed building? What if there's other things in it? That's the one thing that I hope, like you were talking about, look at it from a fresh perspective, I hope so, because it might be something that isn't really what we have thought about.
You mentioned Mid-America Steel, and we spent a good deal of time in this downtown ad hoc group talking about that. And I think the consensus of that group was, you know, we've been looking at that location for decades as a prime location for some sort of complex that would eventually be a property tax gold mine. You know, that would be a beautiful site for commercial development, commercial residential. And what was interesting was to hear downtown business and restaurant folks saying that they preferred the Civic Center spot from the Mid-America Steel spot for walkability and restaurants. I mean, we tend to think of the entire downtown as being walkable, but as someone who has a few thousand patrons, they park their car across the street in the lot at NDSU and, you know, walk into the concert, and then they get in their car and go home. I mean, I think what we're looking at downtown is you park in a ramp, kind of like in Twin Cities with Minnesota Orchestra. You see the people walking through the Skyway with their nice clothes on, and then they go have a drink, dinner, whatever. You park once. And I think even Mid-America Steel felt a little too removed from that ability to do that. So I think when Charlie was saying that, you know, our group just kind of, Brad really heavily leaned toward this, is it just made so much sense in so many ways. And the business community felt that that was in their best interest.
Commissioner Pepcorn, maybe one of the things we should do earlier on is be apprised of what the downtown master plan recommends, so we're not acting absent of that advice, which is really current. And I'm not sure how much or not it might address this, but it might be relevant information as well.
I mean, I don't think the plan was, you know, specific of this facility. Certainly, this general area was seen as the civic thing, but I think it might be good just for us to take a look at the aspects of that Mid-America Steel site. I mean, I've taken a kind of a quick look at it, and when you take out the railroad land, the railroad that's hard to cross, the step slow, if you go with surface parking, I think the most you can get in there is 350 to 400 cars, and that's not going to be enough for the need, and it gets into that long walk like at ESU, where I think just people seeing that information, having that available, and, you know, so if there's a reason why we didn't go there, we have the facts on why that was not selected.
That was one of the original possibilities for convention space too, but city engineers disabused us of that notion because of how much bigger. I mean, it just wasn't going to be suitable for building that large facility there. And I tend to think too, I tend to agree with Linda on this. I don't know if you want to build something over there that will be dark some nights. I mean, I think it's a mixed use is going to be perfect for that. So that's just, and I'm not a developer, but it seems to me like you want a lot of traffic going there. Maybe I'm influenced by the fact that I live in Moorhead, you know, and I like to see. I'm looking forward to the concept of one downtown, and that will be a tie certainly. But I think for either direction you walk when you come out of there, I think the busier that is, and if it has some density to it, that just seems like a better choice because it is. I believe it's very valuable. I think you guys have already identified that, right, Michael? And yeah.
So can I ask, so for our next meeting, kind of the next points would be the cost estimate and the building program. So does that make sense to everybody? That we start, should that be the next thing, or is there something else that they think we should look at first?
I don't know if you can determine program before you've determined potential users. To me, that needs to be moved up.
And so, like Dave was asking about, you know, in the study, they did talk to a lot of those users, but to maybe redo that list, I think that might be a good thing to start with.
Just go over it, yeah, and then
Yeah.
see if there are
Yeah.
things that have gone
Just to
away
make
or
sure
things that
that
could be added. You can use that as our start.
And Mike, I don't want to start giving you a list of things to do, but I would like to see what does the calendar look like for Sioux Falls and Winnipeg, since they're in Omaha, just to give us an idea of what the potential is, and especially Sioux Falls, that's close to our city size and things like that. So I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but that would be nice to have for the next meeting.
Let's
So
look at
Dana,
Duluth,
and I
too.
didn't mean to
Duluth,
pick on
yeah,
you.
the deck.
Do you have anything you'd like to share with us if you want to come up to the podium? Or here's, and like I said, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what would you like to have us look at from your perspective? And you can either sit down at the chair or stand.
You can just go sit down at the chair over there.
No, it's all right.
But now I have to turn around.
I'm Dana with the Arts Partnership. Putting a task force together. It's an exciting thing. So well done. You know, I tell you all the time that I was standing behind you when you walked into the Washington Pavilion, and I
Yeah.
applaud that you have never wavered in your, whoa, we need this. So, well done. I had a number of thoughts while I was listening. One, I think it will be really important. Let me preface, I support a performing arts center. So above and beyond everything else, I support the building of that in this community. But I think it will be important for us to look at what the economic impact happens, what happens to the organizations that are currently programming. Like I think about the Fargo Theater or Sanctuary or Reineke. I think Reineke will be fine because that music program is growing so fast. Fargo Theater could see a pretty significant hit to their budget if and when we have a space that is now more appropriate for the kinds of concerts that are going there. So I would want Emily to have some sort of impact in your decision-making. I can only second Linda's point about really, really, really actively discouraging you from going out and trying to raise $25 million or so from the private sector. Those of us who depend on the private sector to keep our lights on, there will be no local programming if it's all put into the building. So I really discourage that. And three, I think this is just a really exciting time. I like that you're trying to think about something unusual, perhaps. Too often, I think we go for what will be the palatable thing that taxpayers will say yes to, and we don't set a very high, interesting bar. If there's ever a time to set a high, interesting bar, it's a performing arts series. And finally, four, I've been to Omaha. It's unbelievable what they're doing there. It's absolutely a city that should be looked at. They are bigger than us, but their business community would say they're bigger because of the arts. So I really encourage you to spend some time, and I am bringing in their Chamber of Commerce leader in the spring, so I will connect him to this group as well because he happens to be the chair of the Opera Board as well. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you very much.
The Omaha CVB is also very supportive of the Performing Arts Center. They do a lot of stuff. I
So
mean, they
I-
get tour buses coming to the things that happen there. So.
That's awesome. So I think this is just an exciting opportunity, and I just think we need to be methodical and not be in a big rush. And I think we have to, but there's so many things like Rob can identify it, like a liquor license and food service. Well, that's a big deal for the bottom line for the proposed building, just things like that. And right now, we would have to change some of the liquor license laws. So, and governance of the building once it's built. You know, right now we have the Fargo Dome Authority that does that. So there's so many technical things that you also have to work through. And so there's a lot of things to it. And so I hope you're all ready for it'll be a lot of fun, but it's going to be a challenge. But this is an opportunity. They don't come around very often. But this time, our town, this is a way different time. If you looked at our demographics of Fargo and Moorhead, we're young and we're highly educated. And so we want to keep that, and that's the people that support the arts. And so that's the other thing is, I know Dana doesn't want us to get private money, but to me, private money is the key. And I think there's a lot of people that will both support ongoing, but I think if they know that it's a viable place, they will do that and more. That's my thing. I believe there's a lot of people that will support it because, and not to get to dispute, but this will be nothing but complementary to the Fargo Theater, to the Sanctuary, to the FMCT. All those things they're complementary. They're not competitive. But I do think we should have them involved in what's going on. But I don't see this, a 2,500 seat performance hall would only complement the Sanctuary and things like that. So
Well, and-
that's
and-
the end of my sermon for today. And we'll be passing around the plate.
I'll bet it isn't, but Dana, a couple things. Yeah, I'm off, but the Fargo Theater Board, we did discuss this at length, and I think Emily's stance at that time, and this is back about 5-6 months ago, was that they will move and adapt to what happens here, would be very much in favor of this, but knowing that some of their events, but they think it would be 15-20% might have to shift. So they would have to supplant some of what they're doing. They might have to just go back in the theater business, which is why it was there in the first place. But she knows that'll have some different programming, but realizing that, yeah, what's the old saying, a rising tide raises all ships. So I think it will help everyone. The fundraising will be a bit tricky because that could have some impact. But having said that, this is a project that'll get fundraised for, get finished, get built, and be done. And everybody is going to have to keep donating to support all the organizations as they currently are and before this started. So I'm hoping it won't impact any one of the, but having said that, I'm guessing it might. And yes.
Just to that, I think we need to remember that when you have any sort of entity with a public component, like libraries or Fargo Dome or things like that, it makes fundraising much more challenging. I chaired the library building committee, and when we passed that 18-month half-cent sales tax, that raised most of what we needed, and then we had, of course, city staff running it and the library committee, but we needed to kind of fill in that gap, and that was challenging. It was very challenging. I think we can look across the river and see when we had public money helping to build the gorgeous Blue Stem, which is a community gem. It can be used a few months out of the year, but it's a community gem. The piece that failed was that final private fundraising piece, because I think it's easy to say, I mean, we could all name the donors we're talking about, and we as organizations fundraise from those very same people every year. And to ask a huge chunk, I mean, I think what we're thinking about is a major public facility that would be run by an entity, either the Fargo Dome Authority or some other city-connected authority owned by the city. It makes it more challenging rather than easier to raise private funds. Are there people out there waiting to donate to this with naming rights? I've talked to several of them. Yes, the answer is of course yes. But I think we have to at least remain open to a public component of this funding package. I think that's going to be the trickiest part of this whole thing.
Well, yeah, I think everyone agrees there's going to be a public component as well. It's going to be, the question is how big a component can we safely draw on from the private area, you know? 25 million is a lot of money to take out of the private sector. Maybe 10 million isn't too much.
Well, and having said that, I think that segues, Dave and John, that, you know, you're looking at visiting a site, Omaha or somewhere else. You know, is it time that we look at either somebody internally with the city or having a consultant hired and or a architect hired already at this time, go out and get that portion started and that planning started, and even to come back in 30 days or 60 days with something, and then have separate of that a finance committee be meeting and look at the components of how the private might be raised and how, if there was a sales tax, if that's even palatable, if that's an option that we should look at, if there's room. I think our committee looked at that and they sort of snuffed it at 7.5% being the max. If something went off and we could move in to an area, we would do that. But I think the thought was, as the diversion funding is still in place, that there's really not much room to do that. And I know the retail sector didn't believe it possible and didn't have the stomach to raise it past our current 7.5%, which isn't all going, you know, that's going to a mixture of things. So a finance committee might have to look at all those venues. So kind of two components, a building committee along with a finance committee starting tomorrow.
Yeah, I think I like what Linda said. I think we do need to look at the program, so maybe we could have both of those things on the next agenda, look at the program and then talk seriously about moving ahead with finding someone who can do one or all of the things you're talking about. But I think the program, I think it is important that we look at the program and see, make sure we know what kind of things we're looking for, because that will have an impact on the people who start looking at drawing it up, too.
Commissioner Pepcorn, how deep will we be? I know our last item today is reviewing the HVS study, feasibility study. Is that going to be presented to us today, or That's, to me, an obvious place to start is to get a sense of what's been already evaluated. So we're all on the same page. I'm not sure we've all read it or not in the last day, or gotten our arms around it, but I'd like to have us get on the same page there, that this is what was done a few years ago, and this is where, so we're at least start at that point.
Or John, could somebody just recap? I mean, I've gone through it
Okay
as
with
much
that,
as
too.
I need to go through it.
And is that today, or?
Yeah, I can give just a 2-minute recap of what HVS said, and then I think one of the other things we can do is re-engage them. JLG was the local architecture firm that assisted the effort, and have a conversation with both firms. It was HVS in Chicago. They're an international consultancy, but the Chicago office did the Performing Arts Center feasibility analysis. So I think we could certainly give them a phone call and just ask, what does scope of service look like to try to refresh some of your assumptions. As I mentioned at the outset, some things have changed, and some things have really changed in the landscape, and I appreciate your comments, Brad, about the theater, too, is doing more than it was doing, several years ago as well. And we want to be respectful of the users, and to Linda's point, make sure that we're designing a program that's appropriate for the needs of today and the next decade. So happy to do that before the next meeting and talk to HBS about what that might look like. But I can, if the committee is interested, just give a 2-minute on what they said. Okay. I do have some paper copies of it as well for leave behind if anybody would like a printed copy. But as I mentioned earlier, so HVS does convention centers, sports facilities, entertainment facilities across the world. And locally, JLG assisted with that effort back in 2015. And I think the thing that was interesting was that they were very clear, unequivocal, in saying that the performing arts was going to be an economic driver for downtown. It was going to be something that not only impacted the attractiveness of the community for the residents that live here today, but the residents of tomorrow that may not be here, but might come to the community if they saw more vibrancy in downtown and saw more events driving restaurant, retail, and other events downtown. So I thought that was good. It was also clear that this was an economic development study back in 2015 because it looked at the outside spend in Charlie's world, the outside spend for the hotels, for the restaurateurs, and others that were looking to see additional visits downtown. So the feasibility study really looked at repurposing the Civic. That was the thrust of the study process. Their scope did include some visits to Fargo. There were some user group interviews. That question that came up earlier about who was contacted, what did they do on the college campuses. There's a brief summary of what the college facilities were offering and where they fell short. And then it also, there is some deeper analysis that was conducted at the time on the market, what the consultants thought could be being brought to the area. This is before there was some of the, again, additional programming that is already underway today at the sanctuary. And so there are some things that are likely occurring in that facility that were not contemplated back in the day. But the takeaway that they concluded there was that 1,000 to 3,000 seat facility does not exist in this market, both on the college campuses, in downtown, NDSU, and that is really the target for a future facility. So they said, just as Dave said at the outset, kind of that 2,500 would be that sweet spot for a facility range. They did remark as well, and you'll see this in their conclusion comments, that you had the population growth, the economic growth, plus a rising downtown Fargo that really all added up to providing the sort of necessary incubator for this type of activity. I mean, I think they clearly pointed to downtown as having the resources and having the suitability for this type of facility, and so that's where they definitely pointed to downtown. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, if there is a desire to revisit some of their recommendations, we could be happy to give them a call, happy to talk to JLG as well, and just try and make sure that we're reflecting what you folks want to see in user group discussions, taking a look at Omaha, taking a look at some of these other regional facilities, the Washington Pavilion in Sioux Falls, and just kind of getting this refreshed and up to date. I think that it's not out of date terribly. It's not a 10-year-old product, but already 3 going on 4 years old, it is stale in a few areas and would need to be refreshed. So I'd leave it at that.
So what we're looking for is a consensus here. So does that make sense to everybody? That would kind of be the next step, to maybe recontact with them and have them refresh does that make sense? And if it's okay, we're not going to unload John he's the expert on Robert's Rules of Order.
No.
Do we need to do that? I would rather this be informal. Is that okay?
Yep.
But does that make sense to everybody? That be the next steps, kind of?
My only question would be how, and by the way, thank you for including me as well. I haven't spoken yet, but will that preclude this to bumping the timeline out several months? I mean, I wonder how long this would take.
Right. Not knowing what HVS also has on their docket right now, if you were to engage them, I do think that we would need some more time and some analysis that they were to conduct for us over the next several months. But yeah, we can ask them that question and then also talk about scope. What I'm hearing from the committee is that we're really not looking to reinvent an entire wheel here. It's really just refreshing and trying to position this for future discussions right here and right now. Hopefully, we could accomplish that in the
And I
next
think
60 to 90 days.
more of that is so when you go to the public or when you bring it out or when we unleash this, that we have our background information in place. Yeah, I mean, I'm one to push further ahead and just keep moving it on and go, but I think you do need some of that background for people on the committee and everybody else's minds to make sure we're moving in the right direction. You know, I think the need is there. I think the location's there, but they will rubber stamp that if that's the case.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we want to make sure from a city perspective that this study and this task force complements is work that we're currently undertaking with our planning department. I want to introduce just in the back here, Scott Bishop, Bishop Land Design. Scott's in town here visiting the next couple of days. Scott worked in the Downtown in Focus study, and we're trying to talk about the civic quad space out here now with the City Hall demolition. You know, what comes of this space after you demolish City Hall. We obviously have quite a few elevation and grade differences with where we're at with new City Hall and where we're going. But we want to make sure that we're getting some of Scott's feedback and analysis as well. We think that could be really helpful to inform some site and locational decisions for this facility. So just want to introduce Scott in the back.
So getting back to that, does that make sense? And this kind of goes back to, we are not in a rush. We don't have a deadline. And I think it's so important that we're methodical and we do this, if that makes sense. I just think this is a,
Would you start a finance committee now or wait till this comes in before you start putting those pieces of the puzzle together?
I would prefer to wait if that's okay until, I think there's a lot of preliminary stuff we can do before we start doing things like that. And John had a good point. We need to have more women on our group. And so I will talk to, no offense to anybody at the table, but I just, the mayor appointed the group, and so we'll talk to the mayor and have him. But the other thing is we want to make sure we have everybody represented, the different groups. So I think that's something that was a good point. So I hope I didn't get you in trouble for doing that. So, so getting back to this, the consensus is that should be our next step, if that makes sense to everybody.
So at our October meeting, then, you're going to talk to them, find out what they think about refreshing the study. Could we also look at the program a little bit and
Absolutely.
pursue, I mean, that wouldn't take the whole meeting.
I could even see if they'd be available by phone, just to try walk through some of those key recommendations and findings from 15. That might be an option.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time on the analytics of where you're at today with the present-day Civic, what its limitations are, and what you really need to be viable here on this site. If you're to repurpose this building, and then what complete demolition would look like. And there was quite a bit of effort that they went into, much more technical than I think many will recall.
Well, yeah, and it seems like the economic conditions are much different today than they were 4 years ago. I wonder what the repurposing costs might have changed
Right.
to.
I could speak to that a little bit. When we were determining what the location would be for the new library, and not the branches, but the downtown library, and we had several options, and then we settled on repurposing the old library. And so our Minneapolis architects went off and created all of the kind of final budget and proposal, and it was way over budget. Simply because being constrained by an old shell and dismantling and then trying to, create your program within that structure was just such a headache and waste of energy and effort and expense that it was much more economical. Tear it down, they repurpose some of the materials and build fresh. And that's essentially a box with really strong floors. the Performing Arts Center is a much trickier, fussier building with the fly space and the seating and the acoustics and everything. So to try to constrain yourself in an old shell, I think would make even less sense in this case than it did with the library. So I would hope we wouldn't put too much mental energy into that.
I wouldn't put any into it, but I just glanced at, I remember I seem to remember from the study, didn't they say the cost would be about the same? And according to this,
If you haven't read the report, I suggest you read it because
It maxes
a lot
out at
of that's
1,800
been talked
seats.
about here
Is
is
that right?
addressed already in the report. Yes, I realize it's 3 years old, but it was quite extensive, and it is, yeah, it came out a few million more to repurpose it, but you also don't get the type of facility that is going to give you the overall success that you need.
I think
And
it's,
there's no reason to.
I think it's fair to summarize that it would take major modifications to the Civic as we know it today to be able to get that
It's
flat
like building a
space.
cabin in Lakes Country. You'd keep a wall.
Yep, exactly right. You would have to remove entire walls, get new elevations of ceiling heights, to get catwalks, and to get this, get some
I
spaces
mean,
that don't
it's
exist.
unfortunate, but it is just like the Sioux Falls, Washington Pavilion.
Yep.
Where it was, they repurposed the school, they did that. When you went through the tour and really listened to them, they kept the wall. Everything else was.
Well, it's a
was
lot more
repurposed.
expensive, but at least you have to make a lot of compromises.
Yes.
You could put it that way.
Yes.
We have, like you were talking about, that there's so many things that are different from that, but the other thing is, we have a lot more fixed things that now we know. So the city hall, we know where that is now. We also know where the block, the size of the footprint of the, what can be there. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things, but the whole dynamic of the downtown is amazing in 4 years, how it's changed. So now when I look out the window, I wonder if there's a fire drill, there's all these people walking around. That isn't how it used to be. It used to be no one, and now people are living. And so that's why the other thing is, I hope we don't just keep going back to, let's just build this building. Maybe it's a combination with a lot of other stuff, instead of just building a performing arts thing. Maybe there's other things attached to it that, anyway, so I hope we, like an RFQ for a combination of a hotel and performing, who knows what? Do you get what I'm saying? There's a lot of things. I don't want us to restrict our view as to what can be. I hope we do that. You know what? I sound way less like a fiscal conservative every day. It's a little bit scary to me.
What happened to Dave Pipker?
Anyway, so, the other thing is, we're not going to go on, because we have to go to 1:30. If everybody feels like we've had a good meeting and we've got good marching orders, then we can call it a day. So, but I want to make sure everybody feels like they had a chance to comment, if there's any other things. But otherwise, we kind of know what the plan is for the next meeting. I just have one more kind of an open-ended question. So is the important thing that after this, that we know what the cost of the building is going to be? Is that an important next step, or is the potential of fundraising, or what's the order that you think we should pursue? Does anybody have?
Well, one, the site, John mentioned the site before, and I don't know, I mean, in our mind, are we set on the site, or is that something that you are still, once you get this back, are they going to point us in that direction, or are we going to have a site selection committee still?
For example, there's been a community movement recently to have a science and dinosaur museum. Who knows? We might decide if we're going to build brand new from scratch for Performing Arts Center, there might be a repurposing of the Civic that might be an opportunity we hadn't even anticipated. But I don't know. That's just one example of some of the conversation in the community out there. So I think we should be open to the best site relative to, and I think we need to start with needs. What are the needs of the community? Assess our needs, assess who's here, assess the users, what their wants and needs are, and start with that basic, because then we're going to try serve them locally with what we deliver.
So how do we do that?
We probably need to have an assessment at some point of what opportunities are there for potential sites within the downtown reach, just so we have a gauge of that. The downtown is expanding, and there's new parts of downtown opening up, like over where the Nestor was. Who knows what's going to happen in some of those locations in town. But I'd like to see what our spots.
And the only thing I will tell you is that we've done that, so we've been through that
So we should
process.
update that. Okay.
And we, in fact, we did it 2 or 3 times, and it just kept going to this site for a number of reasons.
But the one thing I will say, John, about the sites is, there aren't any others that are free.
This we all.
That was
the big thing.
But there's other.
Well, that was
but
one
I
of the
will say-
criteria, obviously. Parking was a criteria, proximity to Broadway was the walking
But-
element.
but
There were
there
a
are
lot of
s-
components.
There are other city-owned sites, though, now, that weren't there a while ago. You know, and so that, we should try to include those, to at least look at them, that are in this vicinity. Yeah, does that make sense?
There are.
And will they come up with this, Mike? You know, will you ask them site selection to maybe make that a priority, that are we on the right path, or should we be looking at other areas?
My 2 cents on this consultant, if you were to invite them back to the table, is they're going to help you more on the program side and the design side. I think that site analysis piece, we need to take some of the work that Interface Studios and Scott's group did for the downtown study. I think we've got a baseline. We can refresh that briefly and save some time and effort doing that. I think that Dave hit it on the head. There are some things that changed, but there are also some opportunities that look like they did 5 years ago. And so I think we just need to revisit that. So I think we can do that and do it in shorter.
I'm not sure if our group used Scott's group. We used one of the consultants that had just been here, and they were at actually one of the meetings, and they strongly pointed us here also.
Yeah.
I believe it was the Scott Page's group from
Okay.
Interface.
So that's where a
Yes.
lot of our information came from.
Correct.
I mean, I think I could work with the planning department and identify the handful of downtown sites that are under a common ownership, where, you know, you'd have one person you can deal with, and I think you'll end up back at this site, but at least you would have kind of gone through that exercise and looked at some other sites where there's like one block in common ownership. There's a handful of those.
A cursory review, I think, would be easy enough for us to do it.
And don't get us wrong, there are a number of sites around town that would be pretty good for a facility like this, major intersections and other things. We wanted it downtown, so we were a very biased group. So our thought was downtown. I mean, yeah, you could connect it with a Fargo Dome, you could put it out by West Acres, you could put it, you know, near 45th, you could put it in all kinds of places. We were looking downtown for a site.
A
I think the
question.
size and type of facility.
Huh?
The size and type, and given the infrastructure needs and access,
Yeah, and
downtown is the place for this type of facility. And I know some have a broader range of downtown and trying to expand it, but even the Nestor area is starting to get out on the outer edges of the commercial side of the downtown.
Well, and I think we can't forget the iconic nature of what we're talking about. It will be part of a defining element of downtown once it's done. You know, and you think of any other community that has a proper performing arts center, it's part of what you think about when you think about the community. So if it's out on 45th or something, we're just not really talking about the same thing. And then we're not talking about that cultural microcosm and synergy that you get when you have all those things kind of co-located, and it adds to the cultural spirit of what Fargo is. So I think for that and many other reasons, downtown, like you say, is kind of the natural place for it. Where downtown? Well, we've really narrowed that down to a few that make logical sense. So if those are easy to look at the next meeting, I think
Yeah, and we
we
had
can
looked
feel
at
better that we've really done.
this one, the Mid-America, and then we also looked at the bus depot
Bus depot,
transportation facility.
I
And
think
then
you have to
we-
look at the cost, free, and which one has the least chance of other commercial tax-based development.
Right.
And when you're there, it's not hard to figure out what site you're gonna be at.
Another question, just to vet, for the sake of getting this information. There was an announcement not that many months ago by Jade Presents that they were looking to develop a facility up to 3,000 people. We should see what the status of that is, if it's happening, or if there's a partnership there that might work. So we're not all of a sudden at odds with another entity that might be a primary user. And I don't know the status of that, but I do know there was a news announcement of some sort.
I would, Jade is a good person, good company, we work well with each other, but, for the success of this building, if it were to come to fruition, I don't think you want to enter into with other than local arts or the symphony, things such as that, some sort of a exclusive or agreement,
Oh, no.
because I can tell you that there are 4 or 5 different promoters that are
Yes.
watching this and talking to me on this.
I agree completely, but if he develops one, then there's this facility in town and we don't have it now. That's a different mix. If there is a 2,500 to 3,000 seat facility that comes up through private development.
But you know, Jade's needs and the raft of performing arts groups' needs are different. And if
it's
we're
just a-
thinking of,
yeah.
yeah, and if
I
we're,
just want the information.
yeah, I mean, if we're thinking of Jade as a potential user, that's great. But if Jade, builds a beer hall auditorium for.
The one I remember him
groups,
speaking
that's-
about was more in that 600 capacity design.
Yeah, I
as a
saw a news
sanctuary,
release.
and
I think I shared it,
that's
Michael, with you guys.
Went down the road.
But I think we're still
Just,
thinking
it's
apples
just
and
information to
oranges.
gather is all.
Yeah.
Very good. I think we've got a good direction, and so if it's all right with you, we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your participation. It's going to be lots of fun. Hopefully, and the other thing, I hope you feel, whatever you want to talk about, make sure you do. John and I are the co-chairs, but I just look at, we're all here, hopefully going in the same direction. Mike?
And to that end, we're just going to summarize these conversations. We're not doing formal meeting minutes since this isn't a business meeting, so we will do that between Kemmer and myself. And then if it's okay with the group, we'll send another doodle poll to identify a date in October.
Great.
All good? Great.
That's awesome.
Great.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a good afternoon, and if you want to check out our new City Hall, you're welcome to anytime. It's fantastic. It turned out very well, and we're going to be meeting here for the duration until we get all of our technology in the new building. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.